Welcome to Getting Started with Google Analytics. In this first video, we're going to do a walkthrough of the Google Analytics user interface, and we're going to focus on three primary reporting areas within Google Analytics. And these areas will provide you with the most meaningful data and also the most actionable data in putting together and managing your SEO efforts. So let's get started. So we are inside of Google Analytics, and the account that I'm going to be using for this video is actually based on a Google demo account, and it is using a live Google Merchandise Store account. And so all the data that we're going to look at is actually based on a live Google Merchandise Store. So the first areas that we're going to look at is, as I mentioned, we're going to look at three primary areas. So the first one is going to be audience. So over on this side in this panel, these are the different report areas, but we're going to focus on three today. So in audience, what that's going to give us is basically kind of a demographical profile of the visitor. So such things as kind of a high level look at visitor activity, their gender, geographical location, their interests, and also the technology that your visitors are using to visit your site, whether it's desktop, mobile, smartphone, etc. The next area is acquisition. So how did visitors actually find your site? So was it through a search engine search they did using Google or Bing or Yahoo? Were they on a social media site or a social media app such as Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram and found a link there? Was it a referral from another website? Did another website have a link to your site within their site? Was it direct, for example? Perhaps a visitor already had you bookmarked or knew your URL and just typed it in directly, and other factors. And the last one is behavior. So once a visitor gets to your site, what pages did they go to? What are your most popular pages? How many interactions did they have when they were at your site? How engaged they were? What are some of the starting pages where people landed on your site? The exit pages, how long did they stay on your site, etc. So these are the three areas that we're going to focus on. The first reporting area that we're going to take a look at is audience. So once we click on audience, you'll see that there are a number of subcategories underneath audience and even subcategories within subcategories. So there's an awful lot going on under the hood. We're not going to have time to cover everything, but we do want to cover some of the main things. Then, of course, please go ahead with your own account and start digging in and taking a look at some of these other areas. But I think a good place to start any session is going to be with the audience overview. And what you're going to do is get a dashboard overview of the activity of your audience, and everything is based on a date range. Now, by default, Google Analytics starts with the previous 7 days of activity. So right here is where you're going to find how you can change the date range. So if you want to go and look at this year over last year or different date ranges, this is where you would go. So for example, if I wanted to look at the month of February, I'm just going to click here and click apply. And now we're going to get the whole month of February. So right away you can perhaps spot a trend that's already kind of peering out at us. And what this will do, if you hover over here, Thursday, Friday, the lowest point, Saturday and Sunday, and then back during the weekdays, the activity picks up. And then on weekends, the activity slows down. So, that's already a trend that, for this particular, store of Google's, most of the activity, most of the traffic, and probably most of the purchasing is done during weekdays. Now, below this are some other interesting data points to look at. So, during the month of February, there were a total of 66,635 users. And it goes on to explain some other things. So out of that 66,000, 62,000 were new users. So there were some returning. And then there were a total of 83,300 sessions. Now, a session is defined by a group of activities or a group of interactions once a visitor is on your site. So they went to another page or they clicked on a button. So that is an indication of engagement. So the number of sessions per user calculates out to 1.25. So a total of 66,000 users. So you divide 83,000 into this and you get to 1.25. Down here it starts talking, it drills down a bit deeper. So when these users came to the site, they created a total of 316,000 plus page views. So the pages per session, so each time a session started, a visitor went to 3.8 on average pages. And then this is the amount of time per session on average, again, that users spent on this site. Bounce rate, the definition for bounce rate is if somebody comes to a landing page on your site. So they come to your site, they're on a page, and then they leave right away. They have no further interaction on your site. That's considered what's called a bounce. In other words, they got there and then they left right away. So it's hard to kind of pinpoint, what is a good bounce rate. A rule of thumb is, once you start getting up to, the high 50s, etc. But it's going to depend on sites. And if you're like me, I will sometimes do searches and use kind of probably not the best search terms in my search and end up at a page and say, well, this is not what I'm looking for. So I'm going to leave right away and go back to the search engine result page. So down below, it's going to give you options, some demographical, what country, language, city that you can kind of dive into, and languages. So there's a lot going on here, and this is a really good, like I said, this is kind of a good place to start when you go into your Google Analytics account. Another interesting area to look at under audience is demographics. Now, it's going to have basically two different categories, age and gender. So right here is just an overview, and this is just going to give you a diagram of both age and gender. So it's broken down into age groups. And as you can see on the merchandise store, they kind of skew towards a younger demographic. And as we get into older demographics, the visitors start being less and less. And then also on the gender side, they heavily skew towards, by about a 70 to 30 ratio, towards a male audience. So the next step is, in a concept we need to learn here, is the idea of drilling down. So this is giving you a starting point. And now, if you want to dive deeper and drill down more into the data regarding age, we'll just click on that. It's going to load a report that's going to give you a deeper dive and a more deeper look into some of the aspects of each age group. So it's going to give you a nice color graph here. And then down below, and this kind of ties into the overview screen where it showed, users and new users. This breaks it down by age group. So your top age group for this category is 25 to 34. And this is how many users, how many sessions. And then what's interesting is now you can start looking at bounce rates by age group. So the bounce rates are fairly even. And then when you get into the 65 plus, it spikes pretty high. And the pages per session, again, it's higher in the 25 to 34, and then again in the 35 to 44. And then as you get into the older demographics, then it begins to get lower and lower. And then also the average session duration. As you can see on the top age groups, it's fairly high. And then once you get down to the 55 to 64 and the 65 plus, it starts to drop off. So it gives you, some nice deep dive information. And same thing applies on the gender. So it kind of allows you to slice and dice the data and get kind of a more fine-grained view of your demographics. Another area that I would recommend taking a look at is under Geo, and this is where you can kind of find out where your traffic is coming from. So let's look at location, and the first thing that it will show you is going to be, basically a heat map of where most of your traffic is coming from. So in the case of the merchandise store, most of it is coming from the US, and then the darker the shade, the higher the volume, the lighter the shade, the lower the volume. And then down below here, it gives you a further breakdown, and again, more fine-grained data to dig into. And from here, we can drill down into the United States. So at this point, this is going to give you a heat map of the US. And then further down, it's going to give you traffic by state. From here, you can actually dive down into cities. So on this report, we went into California. Now here are the top 10 cities that the visitors, where they come from. And again, this is going to give you deep dive information. So as you can see, you can get very, very granular. A couple of more interesting areas to look at under audience is the technology that your visitors are using when visiting your site. So these two, technology, if you twirl that down, this is going to give you information on what kind of a browser that they're using, and also you can look at the operating system. So top browsers from visitors who are visiting this site, Chrome is number one, followed by Safari, and it goes down. The other thing you can look at is up here, we can switch to operating system. So if we want to see, for example, Windows versus Mac, so here's Windows is the dominant operating system, followed by Android, so that would be the mobile devices on Android, and then Mac. And you can even get screen resolution, for example. The other area that should be of interest is under mobile. What this is going to do is give you insight into what kind of devices are people using when they visit your site. So under this category, about 2/3 of the visitors are using a desktop computer, followed by a mobile phone coming in at about 33%, and then tablet. So this gives you kind of an idea of where they're coming from or what devices they're using when they come to your site. And of course, just like most of the categories, you can further slice and dice and get even finer grain by going under devices. And this is going to give you which devices they're using. So the most popular is the iPhone, iPad, etc. This is a very good thing for you to track, so you have an idea of what kind of experience your users are having. The next area of reporting that we're going to look at is acquisition. Now, as you recall, acquisition deals with how people actually found your site. Now, that could have been through organic search, such as Google, Bing, Yahoo, social media, etc. So once we click on this, we're going to get a couple of sub-reports. So let's start with the overview. And once that loads, this is going to give you at the top a nice pie chart to show you what are your top channels that are delivering visitors to your site. So on this particular site, organic search using search engines is the top channel, followed by social, referral, which would be a link from another website, direct, and on down. And then below that, this gives us kind of a deeper dive look into each category. So organic search, just like on the audience overview, looking at the audience activity, it's going to give you users, new users, sessions, etc. And it will do the same thing with each of the categories. Now, the other interesting thing that you can do, for example, under social, we can drill down and get to some deeper data under social. And below that, it's going to show you some of the social networks where your traffic came from. So the number one for Google, probably no surprise, is YouTube. And then it lists out the other categories. So this gives you some nice fine-grained insights. And again, it breaks it down, by media, and then it gives you all of the detailed information within each one of those categories. Below that is kind of a heat map look at your channels. And there's a legend up here which kind of shows you, the intensity for, in this case, it's for revenue. And so it breaks it down and color codes it. Again, it goes down into organic, social, and on down. And then below that, is another interesting area to look at, and that one is referrals. So these are the sites that are out there that have, in some way link to your site. So this will give you kind of a breakdown of the sites that are linking to you and people are using to find your site. These are the top 10. So very good information, very good data to look at. The last area that we're going to look at is the behavior reporting. And again, behavior is once people get to your website, this deals with where they went, what were their engagement levels, what were the interactions, which pages did they go to. So under behavior, again, as always, it's good to start at the overview to give you just kind of a high level view. So it gives you on a page level then page views, unique page views, and then the average time per page. In this case, it's 44 seconds. So as you recall, when we looked at audience in the audience overview, it broke it down. The session duration was 2 minutes and some odd seconds. This breaks it down. How much time did they spend on average on each page? What was the bounce rate? So this gives you an extra deeper layer of information. And down here, these in this category are going to be the top 10 pages that people went to on your site. So some good information, but as always down below here, this is where we could take kind of a deeper dive look into some of this high level data. This takes your top 10 pages and starts breaking it down into more granular information. So again, it's going to be, page views, unique page views. And then again, this is time on page. So you can start looking at some of these pages and start looking at, for example, the baskets page. Well, people are spending 1 minute and 17 seconds on that. Whereas down here on this particular page, they're spending 12 seconds. So, in your SEO efforts, these are some of the metrics that you might want to take a deeper look at, is how much time people are spending on a specific page. So if you have a key page that you want your visitors to engage with, and it has valuable information, but you're seeing that the average time on that page is really low, that might be an indication that you might want to do kind of a look at the content and restructure your content. So there's all kinds of valuable information that you can gain out of here. A couple of other areas under behavior to look at one is landing pages, and this is when the first page that people encounter when they get to your site, which page are they actually landing on? Now, it's not always going to be your home page, because if they're doing a search, for example, for events, they might land on an event page instead of your home page. So this will give you an idea as far as where people are first engaging on your site. And also, another interesting area to look at will be exit pages. So once people get to your site and they engage, what pages are they actually leaving your site and going on to a different site or ending their session? And again, as the other categories that we covered, there is a lot going on under here. So I encourage you to, dig into this and start looking at some of the categories and subcategories and see what kind of valuable information you can gain. Thank you for getting started with Google Analytics. We look forward to providing additional videos in the near future.